It is so beautiful to see you.
I want you to want me.
Hey out there, live music fans. Welcome to episode number 2 of the Ugly American Werewolf in London's monthly sidecast First Concert Memories, where we interview someone about the first time they saw a band that changed their lives. And this second show is no different. We have the man who literally wrote the book on Van Halen, and that is author Greg Renoff. He wrote Van Halen Rising. He's actually written a new book about the life of Ted Templeman, their producer, which you can order off Amazon, and you can also visit him on Twitter at Greg Renoff to get an autographed copy, so that's pretty exciting. Our first episode on Kiss with Tom and Zeus from Shout It Out Loudcast was a ton of fun. We're so glad to have those guys back on. But you know, the thing was, me and Jackson and Tom and Zeus were all about the same age. So our first show was between Tom's first show on the Hot in the Shade tour and Zeus's first show on the Alive Worldwide, or the first reunion tour. We saw the Revenge tour. But Greg's going to talk to us about the 1984 tour. And we were just a little young to get into that tour. We were 10 or maybe 11 at that point. But Van Halen was blowing up and they were all over MTV. And 1984 is what sucked us in and made us big Van Halen fans. So it's going to be a lot of fun to talk to Greg about that. And obviously it changed his life because he went on to write books about Van Halen. Before we get to Greg, we've got just a little bit of business. We are proud members of the Pantheon Network, a network of about 100 different music shows. There's really something in there for everyone. It's not just rock and roll. So visit pantheonpodcast.com or follow on socials at pantheonpods. And make sure all you Van Halen fans go out and visit our sponsor, rarevinyl.com. Use the code UGLY and you can save 10% off your orders. So if you're looking for that rare Van Halen import, you're looking for a single from a foreign country, you're looking for a store point of purchase item that you can't just find everywhere, maybe a tour program, whatever. You can only use it once, so don't just buy one $5 used CD. Buy a bunch of stuff and save yourself a ton of money, a big fat 10%, using the code UGLY at rarevinyl.com. Now back to Greg. This is going to be a really fun show. We've been looking forward to this for a while because obviously we never saw 1984, and Van Halen famously never put out a lot of live albums, and there really isn't anything definitive from this era. So there's nothing we could watch like Live Without a Net, so we knew exactly what the 5150 tour was all about, or Live Right Here, Right Now. We saw them on that tour, and it's a great keepsake as a memento to remind you of the greatness of Van Halen if you saw them on that tour. But we're going to dive in now. This is First Concert Memories number 2, talking Van Halen with author Greg Renoff.
Van Halen, man, this is pretty exciting for us.
I appreciate you guys having me on.
Wait, I'm sorry I haven't read your Ted Templeman book yet, but that has got to be exciting for Van Halen fans out there.
Yeah, it was a really great experience for me to work with him on that book, and I think it was a valuable end product that gives people at least his perspective on what it was like to work with Van Halen, but also to work with the Doobie Brothers, Little Feat, and I mean, so many huge artists. Honeymoon Suite would be one that comes to mind from the 80s. That kind of goes under people's radar. He worked with Van Morrison, Carly Simon, so all that stuff. Plus, he was a record executive for Warner Brothers for many years, so it was great.
It's awesome. Well, I'll be picking up. I've just moved back to the States, and we've got a lot of stuff going on, so I'm a little behind on my reading, but I will get there.
Okay.
Before Christmas, I promise.
No worries.
And we're just excited to have you on because, this is kind of a new sidecast for us, something we do every month, where we get someone for whom seeing a band live for the first time was life-changing, life-affirming. Mm-hmm. And obviously, since you are such a big fan that you wrote a book, now you could say a couple of books about them. This is a big deal. And this tour, Greg, it has to go down as the greatest Van Halen tour. Now, I know some people who would say they saw on the Fair Warning tour and it blew them out. I get it. But as far as being at the apex of pop culture, having Dave, the frontman there, and the set list is to die for.
Yeah, a lot to say. A lot to say about that. I agree.
So we'll get into it. We've got the 20 questions mapped out. I hope I sent that to you. So, and the first 5 are basically like the who, what, where, why, when that you do on a 6th grade civics, project. So
Sure.
But why don't you hit us with those first 5: date, venue, city, location, band, and tour?
So, my Van Halen 1984 tour story is that I saw them at the Brendan Byrne Arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey, which is still there, but it's not called the Brendan Byrne Arena anymore. I don't know what it's called. That was April 2nd, 1984. They played the 30th and the 31st in Madison Square Garden, and they played the 2nd and the 3rd in New Jersey. And so that was a big weekend for Van Halen fans. That was the Saturday, if I'm remembering right. Friday, Saturday was at Madison Square Garden, and then Monday, Tuesday was in New Jersey, and they had Sunday off, my April Fool's Day off. And so, the story goes, I had fallen in love with the band and was very interested in going to see them. And the show sold out, as you guys probably would expect, back in the day, when tickets went on sale. If you weren't there really wasn't like easy resale, especially for teenagers. I mean, there actually were ticket brokers in New Jersey where if you had money, you could like call the number and have a credit card number and they send you a ticket. But it wasn't like there where you can kind of go and like search tickets. So when it was sold out to me at 14 years old, it was sold out. But there was actually a kid in my homeroom, actually. I'll spare all the deals, but he sold me a ticket. He scalped me a ticket.
Okay.
And I got the ticket. My mom was not thrilled about the amount of money I spent on the ticket, scalping it. This was back in the day of minimum wage, where $3.75 or something like that, or $4.25 an hour you made for minimum wage in 1984. And so, but I had the ticket, and to her credit, she agreed to take me because I only had one ticket. There was no one to go with. I actually ended up sitting with this guy's older brothers and friends. And it was sort of kind of, they didn't know me, and I was with some kids sitting in the seat, so it didn't matter. But yeah, gotcha. I just kind of, I was kind of at her mercy with that, and I didn't drive. I didn't have a license. I didn't really know anyone else who was going to the show, and saw them. Then that was my entry into Van Halen Live. So that was the 1984 tour, April 1984. And that was right after Jump had gone number one. Jump had gone number one about maybe 6 weeks earlier. So that was really the excitement around MTV for Van Halen was really, I think, at the peak then. It was going to continue all summer, but certainly that was a huge moment.
All right. So right off the bat, coolest mom ever for being mad, but yet still taking you there.
She, it's funny. There should be a podcast about that, about parents who took kids to rock concerts, because there are a lot of them. But she, the good news thing, I don't remember when exactly I got the ticket, but it was probably, I'm guessing February or something like that. So she had some time to kind of cool down about it. I'm sure the first day she wasn't thrilled by it because it was inexpensive. I scalped it for quite a bit of money. Where
were you living at the time?
North Jersey. So I lived about 35, 40 minutes from the arena. So it wasn't that big of a haul. But yeah, that was the thing. All those shows, every show in 1984 tour sold out. And we're talking about the kind of being the pinnacle for Van Halen. Certainly that was the most successful tour for them, I believe. I mean, I think for Diver Down, they did really well. They did very well on that tour, but I don't think they sold out every date. And you go back and look at how many days they played versus the attendance, but certainly this was a step up for them. No surprise with the number one song and the number two album and everything. And they just sort of were really at their apex in terms of the Roth era, no doubt.
So you're 14.
Right.
When did you get into them? I mean, was MTV big for it?
Yeah. I mean, so I always tell people, I know I heard Pretty Woman on the radio, but it was never something that I was like, I liked the song, but I was never really like, oh, I got to find out about this Van Halen. I liked a lot of songs on the radio at that time. But yeah, for me, it was MTV. It was sitting there listening to Martha Quinn or whoever talk about the bands and then watching the videos. And I saw Jump. And what I actually did was I went out and I bought 45. I don't remember why I bought the 45. I don't know if I didn't have enough money. That's probably what it was. Or if I did, I was sort of like, well, maybe I just saw it and I bought it. Right. I don't remember, but I saw Jump and I was like, I want to hear Jump. So I bought the 45. And so it was Jump on one side and the other side was House of Pain. And, that's actually what really made me a huge fan of Van Halen's guitar playing more than anything else, because that one was just so dirty and nasty, and just all the soloing that Ed did. It was really, that one obviously is much more to the spirit of what I think Van Halen was as a sort of like a center point in terms of hard rock, heavy / heavy metal.
Yeah.
There was all the pop stuff too that they did, and they were all, they were very diverse, but that was pretty, you want to understand like what Eddie Van Halen was for guitar, House of Pain, just an album track, but it really was a great Eddie Van Halen guitar performance. And so I was like, whoa, this is amazing. And then kind of was all in on getting the album and everything. And from there.
Well, it balanced out a lot of the keyboard stuff that they had fought Ed on for years, right? I mean, Ed had been sneaking it in here and there. But finally, and the rumor has it that he showed him Jump in like 1982, maybe during the Diver Down sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, no, that's, and Ted's like, screw that. That's not heavy metal. That's not what I'm here for, kind of thing. But then a year later, they're like, okay, well, maybe there's a little something to that. And that might bring a nice side question up at some point, but I'll get to it later as far as performance goes. But yeah, finally, those keyboards are working, and it kind of drive 1984 to be more popular than really anything else they'd ever done.
Yeah, I think that's the truth about the 84 album, is that the keyboards broadened their audience. I think I know from my conversations working with the book with Ted, that Ted was afraid that on some level that he thought that Jump might alienate fans and Van Halen fans, and probably did alienate some Van Halen fans. I mean, there's some segment of fans who sort of were like, well, like guys who were sort of like turned off by how poppy it was. But for the bigger picture, obviously, it vastly expanded their appeal to kids who never would have heard it. I mean, again, if Jump hadn't been on MTV, I'm not sure that I would have, maybe later I would have heard Panama or something like that. I'd loved that too, because I loved it. But that was certainly, that moment of early January, February, March 1984, Van Halen Jump was constantly on MTV, constantly. Right. Whatever they called it, heavy rotation. It was on like seemingly like every hour on the hour it was on. So yeah, basically blew their audience up.
And I've been watching a little bit of that. I'm sure you've seen the 5-part, I think it's a 5-part or 6-part special that a fan has put together on YouTube about Van Halen. I was watching the 1984 one here, and it's like, so the cracks were really in the foundation. Dave was starting to think he's a little too big to be in Van Halen. And so when they did the Jump video, they basically filmed the other guys and Dave separately throughout the day. And then at the end of the day, that's when they kind of brought them all together. It's like they're just trying to keep the peace all day. But like a lot of the stuff you see, like Dave and his lowrider riding on the highway in Panama and stuff, he wanted all that in Jump, which I didn't realize at the time. You probably know all this stuff, but I'm trying to clue our listeners into like what's going on in the Van Halen camp at this time. Yeah, they're blowing up, but it's not all hunky-dory.
Well, I think all that's accurate. I think the thing is that going back to the Pretty Woman video, the band became focused, the entire band really, I mean, especially Alex and Dave, from what I understand, became very focused on doing this Pretty Woman video, and it ended up being a bigger production than they initially had planned. And the fun backstory there is that they shot the film, and then they had the sort of the narrative all scripted out for all the different parts, that they were going to have this sort of like mini movie thing they were going to do for 5 minutes. And they realized, the song is too short, so we need to do Intruder. So they added the music, so that way, in other words, the video took precedence over the music. They were, instead of like making music and then going and make a video, they said, oh shit, we need more music. And so they went after the studio. But, this was an era when it wasn't just about MTV videos. It was about people who were on MTV wanting to be movie stars as well. And you can sort of see that beginning with Roth. I don't think he had any inkling in late 1983 that he wanted to make a movie, but let's not miss the fact that there were people, everyone from Sting to Tina Turner to Prince, all these individuals were either starring in movies or being acting in movies. And so there was this definite focus on like the camera can make you a bigger star. And obviously going from 1981, 1982 video quality with, mostly concert rock bands did a lot of concert footage, or if they did sort of like, did like, it was very hokey. A lot of the videos that were early MTV videos were very hokey. Certainly the production values had gotten better. And, Ross saw that. And I think certainly the brothers were unenthusiastic. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the 1984 episode. I suspect that Alan, who did a great job putting it together, is going to talk about the Lost Weekend movie, which was proposed by MTV. Basically, there was an MTV executive, and then who had sort of gotten together with somebody at Warner Movies, I think, if I remember the story correctly. It was like Warner Brothers Film Studios was like, let's do like a Hard Day's Night style movie with Van Halen, where it's just like rock stars acting, kind of goofy and doing this thing and partying, and they were basically going to make this movie around Van Halen for calling it The Lost Weekend. And from what I understand, either all the guys opted out, but you can be sure that the brothers were definitely unenthusiastic about that. If Roth had any, like, if that moved the needle at all for Roth, I'm not sure, but like, there was sort of this push to be like, oh, you guys should be in a movie, right? You guys should be in a movie too. And so the videos were a symptom of a larger problem, which is we could see when Roth finally came to them in late 84, early 85, and started to talk about, I want to make a movie. Mike too, no doubt were not into it. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to make albums. So yeah, the video stuff I didn't mean to go on this giant tangent, but the video stuff is very interesting about the Panama footage, basically all the stuff that they shot for the the original Jump video, which is the stuff you see in the Panama video that got scrapped, and they did the Jump video.
Yeah.
Now, see, I thought you were talking about that contest that they had, the Lost Weekend with Van Halen.
Right. Well, but the success of that made somebody, and again, I might be bungling up the facts a little bit, but I believe it was someone at Warner Brothers Motion Pictures, the Warner Brothers movie studios, kind of said, oh, well, we have Van Halen and Warner Brothers. Let's take this idea from MTV and make a movie. And again, it wasn't going to be like a contest. It was just going to be like, I don't even know what the script would have been like. You can imagine it probably was not going to be very sophisticated. It was like teenagers party with Van Halen or something like that. And it's just like lots of opportunities. You put the music, like think about things like, Streets of Fire and these other movies that are being made around, like they're basically like MTV
right, they're long form music video,
exactly.
Basically. Yeah, exactly. It's like a Miami Vice episode. Yeah.
100%, right. So probably wouldn't have been as artistic as that, but you get the idea. It's like sort of like we could put, we'll do a soundtrack. We'll put 5 or 6 Van Halen songs on the soundtrack, and we'll do, and again, I'm not sure at that point that Roth killed that idea, the band killed the idea, the management killed the idea. But eventually, of course, Roth come around to the idea of like, or has been locked on that idea for longer. Like, I just want to do a Van Halen movie that we're gonna make. We're not gonna let someone else bring us a script. We're gonna create a script for it. So, but there was definitely this sort of thing of making the band bigger through bigger screens. And Ed and Al and Mike were not into it, and that was going to be a major problem. Right? There was a major. Look, I mean, Roth was being on magazine covers with Madonna. They wasn't, they'd have Ed and Dave sometimes, but a lot of times they'd be like David Lee Roth, Madonna, Boy George. I mean, there definitely was this sort of like pop star status that Dave got elevated to beyond the others. And I'm not saying the other guys weren't. Obviously, they were all being like celebrated all across different magazines and interviews and all that stuff. But there were obviously, as the singer, right, you sort of become this sort of focal point, and there was an ability for Roth to sort of, kind of look. The brothers really felt that. I think they felt that the Roth was using them at some point, to some extent, as a platform to elevate himself. And that certainly was what happened when the EP came out.
But he had the looks for it, right? He had the looks and the charisma.
Well, I mean, sure. I mean, look, it happens in a lot of bands. I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, I dare say in a rock podcast, you guys will have to take this with in the right spirit. I just watched the Wham documentary, which I really would recommend. Yeah. It was great. And, and it was like the same, what ended up happening with that band is, of course, that George Michael becomes sort of the bigger star. He's the songwriter, and he's, they both are, Wham, but that, with that situation is interesting. They just sort of decided to go their separate ways, and seemingly Andrew understood that George was the star, and that George was going to go on to bigger and better things, and was sort of like, I've done my time, and I'm going to sort of step back. Yeah. It wasn't the same thing with Van Halen as a band, but you could see that how the singer, the guy who's like singing the song, suddenly becomes like, there's opportunity to sort of to milk the celebrity in a way that, the guitar player who's quieter, he had his chances, but it was, there was, if you were going to see Van Halen on a magazine cover in 1984, it was much more likely, if there was going to be one person and it was not a guitar magazine, it was much more likely it was just going to be Dave, obviously.
It's going to be Dave. Yeah, right. Yeah. And it's, like, I remember watching MTV back in the day and we're just a few years younger than you are. So we kind of missed out. Like, we were talking about, like, we could have seen the show if only we had like a big brother or an older cousin, right? Because we were like 10 or 11.
Cool mom,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Cool mom, you get like 6. Here you go. Here's the
you were talking about the cracks in the armor there. I think you can really see that in the Hot for Teacher video where they do the dance number, where they have all the sparkly suits on, and you can tell the rest of the band is really not, like, they're kind of just, they're not comfortable. They don't want to be there. But Dave is, hey, look at me.
Hey,
and sir, the irony there is, of course, that's what made it that video so funny, because those guys were so awkward and seemed uncomfortable doing it. Dave, of course, that was sort of playing to the stereotype, is like Dave's the song and dance guy, and the other guys are sort of like, this isn't their forte. But without a doubt, that was all part and parcel of Roth's vision. You can imagine. Look, I always tell people, if you want to imagine what the Crazy from the Heat movie would have been like, imagine like, a little bit of Hot for Teacher and a lot of the Yankee Rose video and all that, going crazy. That's what it would have been like. Would have been like a lot. And again, imagine Eddie and Alex in the Going Crazy video, right? Or the Yankee Rose video, like kind of not even in character, but just like in that sort of milieu, which is so like exaggerated comedy. They would have been not into it. But most people don't know that the costumes from the Yankee Rose video, the costumes from the Going Crazy video, the fat suits, the whole thing, that was all for the movie. The movie had been killed at that point, or was basically not going to be made, right? They were having trouble getting funding. So yeah, I guess.
No, I gained 80 pounds. Love that video.
Yeah, so it would have been, the Pete Picasso character, fat suit, the sort of all the characters who were sort of in that were all meant to be in the movie to one extent or another. They'd all been cast for the movie. And so that sort of gives you a sense that that's a taste of, maybe it would have been less slapstick than that, but that gives you a taste of what Ross' vision for, and Pete Angelos, of course, very important, was a vision for that. So, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Like going back to MTV, like being a scrawny, tall, pasty, pale kid with dark hair, I see David Lee Roth, I'm like, now that's a rock star, and I'll never be that. But if you see Rick Ocasek, I'm like, hey, I can look like Rick Ocasek. Maybe I could make something of myself. But like David with this lion's mane and the ripped abs and doing the splits off the drum riser, I'm like, that'll never be me. That's something special.
Right. And I think when I was saying fairness to Dave, he saw this as his moment. He was, pop culture savvy enough to know that everybody has their moment. You can't just sort of go, I'll wait for 5 years because your moment passes. And this was, he had seen his colleagues. Again, Madonna made movies, right? Madonna was in Who's That Girl?
Horrible.
Of course. Yeah. Right. She made
Who's That Girl?
Yeah. John Cougar, a lot of people don't know John Cougar was trying to make a movie. It didn't end up getting made until many years later, but he had a script. I mean, it was like, you read Rolling Stone at the time, it was like, so-and-so's making a movie. They wanted to make, another fun fact is that there was a script for Tina Turner that was sort of like a sudden impact. Like she was going to be like the revenge. She was going to be like, so they were like she was going to be like the, like
Dirty Harry.
Dirty Harry kind of, like, again, like, yeah, like, they were like, people were putting these scripts in front of them. And of course, like she passed out that for good reason, I think, but she was in the Mad Max movie. And, this is just Ross saw this as his, like,
when the old Williams made movies,
right?
Now they usually came on very, very late at night on cable, but still.
Yeah, she should have directed the Crazy from the Heat movie. That would have been something.
That would have been something else.
Like TVs exploding and the school buses going through like walls of fire, or whatever she would do.
I was going to say, going back to we are totally jealous, but going back to the set list, they start off with Unchained.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen tribute bands do this, and I'm guessing this is what happened. I hope this is what happened. They go into the beginning, the main riff, but when the bass hits, does Roth do the big split off the drum riser? Yeah.
What's interesting is that there's a bootleg that was, there was a gentleman, a kid in Canada who was able to sneak a video camera into the Montreal Forum and actually recorded quite a few shows from there. I've heard numerous stories about how he kind of pulled it off as like literally his mom worked there and used to let him in, like, I don't know, she like worked one of the gates and used to let him in with the video camera, but he shot this. And so you can see that's only, if I get my math right, that's only 17 days after I saw Van Halen. And it was, I actually saw that, had a copy of that videotape in late 1994 and saw it in my basement. So I was like, oh my God, like, third generation video copy I bought from somebody. But came off the drum riser in the first song. And it's, kind of locks, kind of my memories have sort of been like mixed in with that video, but the show was very scripted, as you can imagine. So like they would do this, Rock would come off the riser, and then they did he would had this the same glitter jacket he would wear, like long jacket he would wear in the Panama video. He took that off, and it was so, for me the thing was it was so overwhelmingly it was just an assault on the senses, and that's really what made those concerts, especially all the concerts of that era were so. I don't know. It just doesn't, I think part of it is you can only be 14 once, and sort of, you've seen today, like, there are plenty of concert openings that are cool. I go to an arena show, I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And, there's obviously flame effects and lasers and all this stuff.
Sure.
It's like, wow, that's great. But, to have that be the first time you ever saw as a teenager or as a person ever to see that type of thing, it was so loud. The spotlights were going all over the place where they came on, and then it sort of hits the spotlights, hit Roth, and he comes off the riser. And it was just such a high energy assault on the stage. I mean, it was just, those guys they were so well locked in with each other and how to perform. Even if they weren't getting along, nobody could tell that. I mean, you couldn't tell that they looked like this sort of like gang up there on stage having the best time in the world. And, they went through the first few songs very, very quickly. I remember that. And then they stopped. And this was very scripted. You can see this on that bootleg that Roth starts talking to the crowd. It's sort of like they take a break after Running with the Devil. And Roth just stood there for like 2 minutes in New Jersey and just And people just cheered. They just cheered. And he didn't say anything. Like, you can hear it on the feed on the videotape. It's the same thing. Just, Montreal stands there and cheers, and he's like, it's good to be back in New Jersey. And then he starts cursing a whole bunch, which again, when you're 14, like, I've been to plenty of like, I don't know, Broadway shows and like assemblies and whatever else it was. And I'd been to a couple of concerts before, but like, he's like, it was just like so. Like, you're like, you can do that? I mean, I don't know, like 14, I'm like, you can do that and not get arrested, And he was like, I remember he said something like, why don't we just forget the rest of the show and go across the street and get drunk? And like, and like people just, with the crowd just screamed and screamed. And so, I mean, look, I have no idea what that feels like as a human being to be up on the stage like that and have that many people doing that night after night for you. But you can imagine, like, for anybody who had that, look, plenty of bands go out on stage and they don't have that, they do well in front of crowds. I mean, I saw Billy Squier, no offense to Billy Squier, but it wasn't as ravenous of a response. I saw Billy Squier later that year. I mean, people liked him and it was a good show. I liked it, but like, I wasn't going to stand on my seat for 10 minutes and scream for Billy Squier, right? It was just, you were like clapping, people like, it was a good show, believe me, good show, but it was just that level of like mania and charisma that was coming off that stage. And so, yeah. And then they continued on. And the thing I remember too is that, you're speaking about keyboards. There were a lot of keyboards.
Yeah, did Ed play them or did they pipe them in?
No, they played them. I mean, there was no piping in keyboards back then. So they played All Wait. They played that. They also played, Ross did this Tai Chi sword solo, for lack of a better term. He sort of spun the sword around and did these moves. And at that point, Eddie played an instrumental keyboard part, which, the way I describe it, if you listen to Why Can't This Be Love? There's that very, very short keyboard intro with that like pulsing bass, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So he did that and kind of soloed over that with the keyboard, and Ross did his thing. So they did, not only did they do I'll Wait. So, that really wasn't a keyboard solo, so to speak, because Ross was in the spotlight, which maybe that was annoying to Ed too. Like he's, there, he was like doing this whole like instrumental piece on keyboards. But they did, they along the way, they did Jamie's Crying, they did How's the Pain, they did Running with the Devil.
The set list is badass, man.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's good. Interestingly enough, like looking back on it, there were a number of like, there was this sort of like Roth talk for 5 minutes at the beginning, 5 to 7 minutes. He stood there and just sort of like let people like cheer, and he said a few things. Then he did the sword thing, and then they did in the middle of Unchained, of Everybody Wants Some. And this is about 3/4 of the way through the set. Alex stayed behind the drum kit and just sort of like would play fills occasionally. But Ross just talked. Like Ross was just up there like talking.
Just riffing?
Yeah, just like, it was generally like, he had like imagine you had like a framework for a script. And if you listen to any of the bootlegs, you listen to like the other, stuff on YouTube, you can hear it. It was like, we got into town, there were all these girls and but it was just very, my point is like in 1979, they were out for blood in terms of like, they were trying to break the band. They didn't need it. There was nothing to break anymore. They were just like living off the fame at this point. I don't mean that just like to rip those guys, but I just mean like, they knew like, it didn't matter how many songs they played and people were going to be entertained by that. So like, to have Roth up there for that length of time, just sort of just telling jokes. It was like stand up almost. I mean, it really was. It was like, he was like telling jokes and like sort of cracking one-liners and like saying things to girls, he did all these sort of like scripted lines, like, don't stick your tongue out at me unless you intend to use it, or like, these types of things. They were like, it was like this sort of like stand up almost, So my point is, they did it. It was the set list was great, but there was probably if they were going to be up there, like we're going to be up there for like, I don't know, like an hour and 15 minutes or something like that, or like, or an hour and 25 minutes, let's say. There were probably an opportunity to do 2 more songs they could have done, that they, at least 2 more songs they could have done if they sort of cut down on all that stuff. But look, let's face it, Roth got to talk on stage for 15 minutes, and then he got to leave the stage, and Eddie got to play, Eruption for 15 minutes, which was great. I mean, obviously that was like a life-changing thing to see that, more than the Roth stuff was entertaining, but at the time, obviously I was like, oh, wow, this is, I didn't know. I was like, oh, this is great. But the Eddie Van Halen guitar solo was so mind-boggling, which is incredible.
Hi, this is Mick Wall, and you are listening to the Ugly American Werewolf in London.
Well, so was 316 a part of it at that point? Because it was on the next tour, 5150.
No, he didn't do that. I mean, he did, he did like a little bit. That again there was pretty much of a framework to that. But as I recall, he had already done Cathedral. They did Cathedral in the set. So he did like a little bit of Spanish Flies. I remember he did a little bit of the Mean Street Introduction, and then just bits and pieces of eruption kind of broken out. And then he did the Yalta did, which was kind of cool, which was the tabletop guitar where he propped, I remember this very distinctly, he propped the guitar up kind of at his waist where it, instead of it being vertical, it became horizontal, and he played on the neck with it too. And that was just, again, that was just, no one had ever seen anything like that before. That was just kind of a complete game changer. And sort of, it sounded wild too, in the arena. That was the pushing towards the end of the set. And they did, they did Panama, You Really Got Me, and then Ain't Talking About Love. They did not do Happy Trails when I saw them, but they did do that about half the 1984 tour. But they did, it was the best concert I ever saw in my life. I'm like, now I'm sitting here like years later, like armchair quarterbacking on this stuff. But obviously when I walked out of there, it was like, I was in absolute shock.
Mind was blown and just happy as a clam.
And it's still
Mom, you won't believe this.
Right.
Stop screaming at me, Gregory. We're taking you home.
I'm sure, I didn't have earplugs. I'm sure my ears were ringing like crazy, kind of straight. I had a pretty good seat. It was like, you can imagine like the, there's sort of, it was a hockey arena. And so the stage is, basically at one end of the arena, and that would block off like, maybe like 15% of the arena then would be behind the stage. But I was basically straight back, which would have been like behind the goal on the other end of the other hockey goal.
Okay, so straight away, but maybe 50 yards away or something.
Good seats, right? Probably 75 yards away. Good seats. But I'm sure it was loud. Yeah, I mean, look, it was something that stuck with me. I went to see Van Halen numerous times in the years that followed. I didn't see them every tour, where I was at school or something, and I was not able to go in terms of where I was living at the time. But when I had the opportunity through high school to go see Van Halen, I always went to see them. And maybe a Van Halen fan for life. And I was, I was devastated when and I always tell people like, I never believed like Ross was going to quit Van Halen. There were, you guys know, like, back then it was all about magazines and MTV. Like MTV would obviously give you more recent news, like with more like less old news. Like, would be like, right. A little like 3 days or 4 days or 5 days, you get news from MTV, maybe less. But Rolling Stone was like, sometimes a month.
That's right.
And the thing that's interesting is that I didn't really believe they were breaking up, or because just react. Oh well, that's what do they know? What do the journalists know? Like Ross, because Ross would always say we're not going to break up. That's the last thing you hear Ross saying, like we're not breaking up. If he did interviews, then the whole summer goes by, and then I see Farm Aid on TV, and that was another like kind of like a big MTV moment or whatever that was. I guess that was National Network, but it was all over MTV too. The sort of the Eddie and Sammy do rock and roll, and that was sort of that was the end of my childhood right there.
Yeah,
that ended my childhood right then. That was like the Santa Claus doesn't exist, Easter Bunny doesn't exist, and Van Halen breaks up. That was the last one. That destroyed all my innocence. So
that's it, yeah.
How did Ross sound vocally? I mean, I know you said he had the spoken word stuff, but how did he sound when he actually sang?
I mean, he sounded fine. I mean, nobody. I didn't even think about that. And I would dare say that nobody thought about that. Like like I think Ross' brilliance was he realized that the performance needed to be a physical performance. Yes, he screamed, he sang the words or whatever, he did his thing. Listening to it, right? You could say, well, it's pitchy. It's just like it's all like that's all. It was irrelevant. Nobody. I mean, again, I didn't do like a survey, but I dare say if you walk people out of the arena, everyone would say David Lee Roth, the man. I loved the concert. It was incredible. No one's going to be like, well, he sort of bungled the words up on this, and he really seemed like he was, missing his cues on everybody.
No one cared, right?
Nobody cared. Look, later on, he certainly, he's had his challenges with his vocals, and he's sang better at times than other times. But I think the important thing was the guy, whether chemically induced or just fitness or whatever you want to say, he moved the entire show. Like he moved the entire show. I mean, running from they all did. Eddie and particularly Eddie and Dave ran. They must have run like 5 miles on that stage. The stage was gigantic, and they were just running and jumping. And you kind of see where Eddie had to have the hip replacement because he was doing these slides on the stage and all these jumps. And no wonder he had physical problems in his body. He started to break down. I've heard Roth has had numerous back surgeries and stuff like that. I mean, it's not surprising. Those guys worked. I mean, they really worked. And that was again, they're playing for the person up on the upper level, right? Who's not going to be able to see their facial expressions necessarily. There was no video screens. You're not going to see their facial expressions, and you're not worried about exactly the song. But seeing Dave go off the drum riser, or jumping off the side of the stage, or all that stuff. That was what translated into the good show. So I mean, yeah, I think he sounded fine. I mean, I saw Rolf at Eat 'Em and Smile. I never once thought oh, the vocals aren't good. Look, and you obviously you go to see Dio or something in the 80s. You're like, oh, Ronnie's singing is incredible.
That guy can sing, yeah.
Right. You're like, right, whatever. Like you're locked in on the singing, right? That was the thing. You're not worried about whether, Ronnie Dio could do a split off the drum riser. You're worried about how he sang. But
you make a good point there, though, Greg. I mean, like today, with all the video screens and the effects and all the stuff that they can do on a show, the guys don't really have to do that much. They don't have to run around. They have to be where a camera can see them so everyone can see them on the screen. But back then, for entertainment purposes, you got to have a front man like David Lee Roth who can do all that stuff and who will go out and do it every night. Right?
Yeah, or has a stage presence that's worthy, like a Brian Johnson or someone who has a stage presence that can kind of keep people like interested. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. It's like all of that sort of is all now like revisionist history about whatever. And again, I'm not going to sit here and say if you listen back, you're like, whoa, that was an unbelievable vocal performance by Dave on that. He just, for the most part, he just was not focused on that. Right. Again, you listen,
he's an entertainer. He's not a singer.
It was just, they were right. And it was it was anybody who saw those shows understands that the physicality, the movement, the hitting the different spots on the stage where they did the different things, were climbing up the steps to the top and being behind the drum riser so he could do the moonwalk. All that stuff was much more the visuals and that level of the performance and the sort of the charismatic frontman stuff was much more important to sort of making the show memorable than anything Roth would have sang. I mean, but to be honest with you, I mean, it was so loud too. I mean, I remember it being, I remember very vividly being, it was like all guitar and drums. You couldn't really hear any bass. If there was, it was just kind of like the kick drums kind of overwhelmed the bass. So like whatever Michael Anthony was doing on bass, I mean, you couldn't hear it. Maybe
he had his Jack Daniels bass.
He did have a Jack Daniels bass. It's hard for me to remember. I don't remember it vividly in my mind, but I'm almost positive he had it. He said his voice. You could obviously hear his voice. I mean, that was the thing. You knew that somebody was like really like carrying the background vocals, and I later found out that was Mike. But the sound mix was all Ed. It was you could hear the vocals obviously, but like the background vocals, but there was no bass. I mean, again, maybe if you stood on the other side, like the arena, or like if you were right in front of Mike's stack, like I'm on like in the first 5 rows, maybe you could hear the bass better. But where it was with the PA, it was just so a matter of like, it's funny, any sort of like subtle things that were going on in terms of with the guitar, you could hear it, especially when he did Eruption, like he would turn the guitar down or turn it up, and you could hear like his hands were so strong, you could hear these very subtle things he would do on the guitar. But it's sort of like it was all like Roth and those guys, it was just like, it wasn't distorted or to the point where you couldn't like, it wasn't like, oh, this sounds terrible. It was just sort of like, it was just a mix that was meant to be like in your face, to be like loud. It was like, I don't know if it was the loudest show I ever saw, but it certainly was as loud as any other show I ever saw at the time.
Hey, this is Scott Holiday from the Rival Sons. You're listening to The Ugly American Werewolf in London.
All right. Well, you've answered a lot of these questions already, but let's work through a few of them here. The venue, that's where the Devils played, right? You went by yourself, but you with like your buddy who sold you the tickets, his older brothers and their friends, right? It was your idea. It wasn't like you went around with a crowd. You like, yes, I have to go see Van Halen. Your mom took you there. Question number 9, how did you get there? Very nice of her. I guess you probably didn't have much of a pre-game ritual at 14 with your mom taking you and picking you up, right?
There was no tailgating a game later in life. That was just sort of like, we drove up. She drove up in this like legitimately, and we had a station wagon, and we just drove up. Perfect. And door opened. She said, "I'll pick you up right here." Like, well, I don't remember whatever landmark. There was like maybe it was a flagpole or something. I don't remember. She's like, "I'm gonna pick you up." I think it was probably a flagpole or something. She's like, "I'll pick you up at the flagpole when it's over." Nice. And that was it. Don't do any whatever she said. Don't do anything stupid or like whatever. I don't remember what she said, but like something mom liked.
It's like in Almost Famous when Cameron Crowe's mom says, "And don't do trunks." That's
I bought a shirt. I did buy a shirt too. I must have I bought a shirt, and I don't remember. I think they were like $20 a shirt, and I don't have it anymore. But I think it was. But yeah, right. Again, it was one of those shirts that did not last. I don't remember. I mean, it's funny because typically I would have I think I would have saved. Like I saved so much manual stuff. I'm shocked I didn't still save it. But I suspect it was like became unwearable. Like either it was like too tight, from shrinking, or it ripped or something. And then it's just sort of like, I'll just get rid of this. But I do remember the merch. Whatever again, I don't think you could use a credit card back then either. By the way, I think it was like all cash. And it was like the merch line was, it's not like, it wasn't like Taylor Swift today, but it was like, there was a lot of people at those merch stops. I remember they had like shirts and posters, whatever. They had sort of like everything you get from the Van Halen fan club at the time, which was sort of in like buttons and shirts and whatever else, bandanas and painters hats that said Van Halen or whatever. But then I went to my seat and then walked out afterwards. And
Was it the shirt with the eagle on the front?
That was the shirt I had, right? I had that shirt.
Because I remember somebody in my school had that. I'm like, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, they're it's funny they've reprinted those in a number of sort of like they've used the eagle and they're like kind of like, so there's like the original version, there's like modified versions of it, but the opening act, by the way, was which we can talk about, was Autograph.
Oh, really?
And that was Autograph was they were from LA, and they ended up doing 2 or 3 albums for RCA. Okay. And Van Halen at the time had this, I didn't know it, but had this policy in place where they never really took anybody out with any good for the exact reason. I mean, really the exact reason why was that they wanted people, they weren't worried about any band like blowing them off the stage. They weren't like, oh my gosh, if we bring Crocus out, they're going to blow us off the stage. That wasn't what it was. But they didn't want anybody who was going to keep people's attention from buying shirts. Like this comes from the drummer from Autograph who passed away. Said this in an interview. He said that they didn't have a record deal. Okay, the drummer was friends with David Lee Roth, put this band together, and they were like, go out and tour, you have some songs. They had demos, and so they had some songs. And Roth and those guys kind of knew some of the guys from LA. So, but they were a band without a record deal. Now imagine it's the biggest tour, right, in Van Halen's history, and they're taking out somebody, not someone out on Warner Brothers, like, oh, like, hey, bring out like, I don't know, like up and coming rock band from Warner Brothers. Right. You could be like, no, they took out a band without a deal. And the drummer from Autograph said later that when Eddie Van Halen called him, or he talked to him again, maybe at rehearsal or something before they went on the road, he was like, you guys are perfect for us. I'm really excited you guys are going to be on the road for us. We needed a t-shirt band. Eddie said this to the guy, and the guy was like, what do you mean a t-shirt band? Like, I'm sure the guy thought, like, you're going to put us on a t-shirt? You're like, oh, no, we need a band that no one's going to be into, and everyone's going to go out and buy t-shirts before the show. Before we come on, 100%.
Cool.
Like,
thank you.
So, right. Well, that's true. I mean, because, I actually watched Autograph. I sat there and I remember somebody, talk about throwing things. It's funny. I have this very, very vivid memory of somebody threw a tennis ball and it bounced and he hit the guitar player's guitar. Nothing like, I don't remember Mick plunking or anything, but I just remember like bounced off his guitar and like bounced away. And I just was like, oh, this is what people were booing. And I just remember like, it is the first real rock show I'd ever seen, for lack of a better term. And so that was, so there you go.
Stupid motherfucker hiding out in the dark. Any asshole can throw shit at me where I can't see you, motherfucker. You come on up on stage and let's see what you do.
But that's crazy though, because you would think the people at Warner Brothers, like you said, it was the hottest tour of the summer / year. Okay, we've got these guys, they'd be perfect for. Nah, no thanks. We'll grab.
I'm sure. I'm sure there was like no conversation about that. I'm sure they already knew. I mean, because Van Halen had been doing. Van Halen had been doing that for years, or they would just take bands out that even like they took out. Oh, After the Fire, they played some shows in San Francisco. Like you could.
Der
Kommissar, right? So again, like Der Kommissar was a big song, right? But like, think about it: is the average Van Halen fan going to be into that? No. Again, I can listen to that and be like, oh, that's kind of a cool, fun, nostalgic song to listen to. But like, they were out on the Diver Down tour with them, and they took out a couple of other bands that were sort of maybe of a higher level than Autograph, and maybe not as famous as After the Fire. But for the most part, that was the deal. They just took out. The Velcros was another band on the 1984 tour. Ever hear the Velcros? Nope. That they opened shows. A band called Rail opened shows for them in 1979 or 1980. I think in 1980. Like, nope, never heard of them. Again, they were like kind of a regional band. The Fabulous Poodles opened some shows for them in 1979.
World.
So that was like a new wave band again. But that was the thinking. Again, they were not worried. They weren't worried that somebody was going to upstage them, but they just figured this out early on. Like, the more shirts can be sold if people are not into the opening act. And they're just going to this band, I don't really like this band, or I'm not into this band. I don't know this guys. I'm going back out to the wait in line to buy a shirt. That's where they made them. That's where they made the most of their money.
Gotcha. Well, I see that changed because by the time Jackson and I had the chance to see them for the first time, it was the For Unlawful Carnal tour.
Yeah, I mean,
and Alice in Chains opens for him, and there were people there to see Alice in Chains who left after they were done.
Right, 100%. I think that was like, obviously Sammy had something to do with that, and maybe the brothers sort of, again, I don't know, that was probably from Van Halen management at the time, Noel Monk, and those guys kind of thinking that, Raw thinking that was a good idea, and the brothers didn't. Who knows? Maybe the brothers didn't care. I'm not saying, and from what I understand, like, they treated the opening acts well. I mean, they always were like, everyone I've ever heard talk about opening for Van Halen, those guys were like that. Eddie was came to dressing room and talk to them. They didn't treat them like shit. It was just a matter of, it's like,
Yeah.
we're giving you a chance, but we're not, this is the situation. But right. Yeah. Then they had like Bachman Turner Overdrive open for them in 1986. And then in 88, they had, I might be messing this up. Baby Animals maybe might have opened them for 88, or maybe that was later. So sorry, my Van Halen fan card is going to get suspended because I can't remember the name of the band. I'm confusing them in my mind. But yeah. And then like there were, right, Alice in Chains, and then there was Brother Kane opened for them when I saw them in '95, and so there was that sort of that policy changed. And I think that was for the better. Obviously, I mean, this is really what you want. You want like bands that are suitable for that. But that was it was a different look. All cash business. You guys can figure it out. I mean, it was an all cash business, and the more T-shirts you sold, that was all like
it's free money, baby.
IRS was not going to be able to audit the T-shirts. I'm sorry. It's just like that's the reality of it was. I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but I mean that was like pure cash, right? There was no promoters cut.
We get it, yeah. We understand.
That was just straight into the coffer. So the more merch they could sell, the better. But there was, I mean, plenty. Like I don't remember the doors open, but then they did the getting ready for the show and whatever they do. They break down the equipment for autograph, and I was like, they didn't have they had like small. They didn't have any lighting or anything. There was nothing. There was just drums, bass, guitar, and a keyboard. So probably like they literally probably could have gotten that shit off the stage in like 20 minutes, but they milked it for like 45. And
sell more T-shirts. Yeah. All right. So favorite moment and favorite song.
Oh, favorite moment. It was probably, I mean, for sure, Eruption. I mean, that was the thing that was kind of like the most life-changing for me in terms of that. I was a crappy guitar player, and I came to kind of like the best intermediate guitar player of all time. I could never like progress. I just never really could. But like for me, seeing that at the time when I was starting to pick up the guitar, I was like, oh wow, it was just everything to me. What was my favorite song? Probably play with Little Guitar, which was he played the little Les Paul guitar, and I have very clear memories of him playing that riff, which I thought was so cool and so unique. I don't think I'd ever heard. I'm 99% sure I'd not heard Diver Down at that point. I don't think I did, because I think I'm trying to remember what the other album I bought before that. I might have been Van Halen 2. I had Van Halen 2 in maybe 1984 by the time I went to see Van Halen. But very much an album I love, and a song that was just a great live song with the harmonies and everything. And they did it great. I mean, they just did it great. That was maybe the best song they did all night.
I hear drums. Wait a minute, I hear guitar. Yeah, get loose, baby.
Yeah.
Okay. What about what was the biggest disappointment in your first big Van Halen show? Anything?
I don't think I was disappointed by anything. I mean, I think like
you were stuck with some old kids you didn't know, maybe.
I mean, when the lights came on, I was probably disappointed. I mean, I don't remember being disappointed by anything. And again, I didn't have really much of a measuring stick to go against. But of course, the reality is that after that, it was all like, I saw lots of other good shows and lots of other good bands. But, you kind of saw when like a band really couldn't deliver in an arena. There was one band in particular that I saw, later, and you sort of like, I was like, they're a big band. And you're sort of like, they're not Van Halen. Like you kind of could see they just didn't really have the ability to sort of that sort of like ability to own the moment. So yeah, nothing really disappointed me. And I mean, that's good. It was great. Yeah. I do remember wishing that I had a ticket for the next night. I mean, but I knew that was like impossible. That was like a no, that was a no go. I'm sure. I know there was no ticket available, but like, I was like, come on. They're playing again. Like I knew they were playing another night, but then they were off to wherever they were off to, like Boston or something. They were off to the next city.
Now, obviously, you've seen them again. Can you give us an idea of how many times you've seen them, and then where does that night rank in all the times you've seen them?
It's funny. I have people who I follow on Twitter, or I've seen Van Halen like dozens and dozens of times. I've probably seen them. I don't even know the count. I mean, like less than 10. I've seen them less than 10.
But most every tour?
I saw them on 5150, Monsters of Rock. I did not see them on OU812. I saw them, and I didn't see them on, which I really wish I'd seen them on that and the Unlawful tour. I saw them on the Balance tour. And then I didn't see them again until 2007.
Me too.
It ranks as number one by far. The 5150 shows were fun. They were great. I mean, they were very, very fun to go to. Monsters of Rock was kind of weird because it's in a stadium. And the thing was that it was a long ass day. I mean, and I think, it was hot, and, you see Metallica and, Scorpions. And I got to tell you, it was just sort of, I think the crowd was kind of gassed out by the time they came out. They were good. I mean, it was, with Van Halen, it was never bad. It was always a good show. It was like a very,
Sure.
with Van Halen, it was great, right? It's like, you're seeing Van Halen, but it was like, it really wasn't going to measure up to that first time. When I saw them on Balance, I saw them in Memphis at the Pyramid. And what was unique about that show, I don't know if it's unique, but what was sort of stood out in my mind about that show was that was, they call it the ambulance tour, because Ed and Al were both having physical problems. And so Ed played from a stool. That was September 1995. And he largely played from a stool because he was having a hip replacement soon. So his hip was like extremely painful for him. So he would sit up a couple times and solo, but for the most part, he just leaned on a stool and played sitting down. And Alex,
he had that big neck thing.
brace.
That looked awful.
Supposedly, I mean, the story always was that I don't know enough to say it's not true. It always seemed like kind of a weird, like supposedly plaster fell on his head and hurt his neck. Maybe that's what it was. I mean, I don't know. It's like it's always hard to tell with sort of like injuries with famous people. It's always like when they fell down the stairs, and it very much could be that. But I always thought that was kind of a strange, like plaster fell from a ceiling and hit him on the head. But either way, he had a neck brace, and
that's what he told the old lady.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. And again, I don't know. Like,
I swear,
Alex, it could be 100% true, but it seems like something I might say to say to somebody, what happened last night? Oh yeah, whatever. Whatever. You bump your head on the door, right? You're like, oh, I just, instead of like being punched in the face, I ran into a door, like that type of thing, right? But yeah, they were both kind of limited in and they played great, obviously, great show. But yeah, the other shows were not. It just was, I mean, it was almost a different thing. And again, I don't mean that to knock Sammy. It was just the energy level with the Sammy shows were great. And I saw Sammy with Van Halen a lot, and I loved it. I saw them twice on that 5150 tour, and they were great shows. But it was just sort of a singular thing with Van Halen and Roth that first time. And, it was
magical first time. We were 14. You can't get that back, right? You can't recreate that. Yeah.
No. And, the thing I will say on the 2007 tour, speaking of Roth sang great. And I really think it's a shame that for whatever reason, the band decided not to put a live album out or any sort of live footage out from the 2007 tour, because I know Ed was having some problems with substances and he was not, it took him a while to kind of get on the straight and narrow on that tour. And there were some problems there. But when I saw him in Kansas City, Roth, I was actually shocked at how great Roth sang, because he was singing much better than he had sung like on the Sam and Dave tour. And like you'd see, whatever. That was kind of the early ages of the internet. And you would see YouTube was up and going, right? It was like you'd see footage of him like performing it, whatever, with his solo band. And he was in the gold lame spandex and everything. And it was just the vocals weren't great. I mean, they weren't great. Sort of like, oh, this is where this is heading. But Roth, really, to his credit, I really was on it. I mean, it was I was shocked at how great it was. And so, from that standpoint, that was very memorable about that second instance of seeing Roth, was how, in some ways he outshined Eddie, because when I saw them in Kansas City, Eddie, I'll just say this, Eddie flubbed little guitars. And it was actually like a clunker. And it was like, did that just really happen? And he ended up going to rehab fairly soon after that. Like within within a week or two of that, it was this tour got stopped. Maybe longer, but not much longer than that. And
I saw that tour, man, and I might have seen it just before that, because they came.
No, this was October. Yeah, you probably did.
And I remember, because I used to be like a top 50 reviewer for Ticketmaster, and I remember I gave them 3 stars instead of 5, and I'm like, Cool and the Gang, the opening act, were better than Van Halen. They did not print that review, by the way. But
trying to sell tickets.
Yeah, I know. And it's kind of a bummer that Mike wasn't in the band, because you got to see the original band on 1984. I'll go to my grave never having that, right? Yeah,
I think that was sort of when they came out and did the press conference. I mean, you sort of saw the writing on the wall that wasn't going to happen this time around. It's sort of, I had always hoped that eventually that was going to happen. Again, I thought Wolfgang was thrust into a very challenging situation as like a young kid. Your dad says you want to join Van Halen, and you're thinking yeah, okay, you want to help my dad, and my dad needs me, and right. And so, but I guess what I'm saying is you kind of always hope that at some point there would be not that we're going to kick Wolfgang out, but it basically they were going to be okay, we're going to go out as the original band. And I guess that almost, as you guys know, almost happened before Eddie passed. And it just never happened. And, kind of looking from the 2007 standpoint, you think they'll tour in 2009 and they'll maybe right. Mike will be back in 2010. And it never, of course they didn't, I don't think they toured again for 2012, right? They took 5 years where they toured again. And then, they only did really the 3, again, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, they did the 07, 08, the 2012 tour, then they did 2015, and that was the wrap, if I'm remembering correctly. They only did the three tours with Roth. And so they It just that never came around to happening. But for me, the thing was, I had given up any hope of them ever reuniting with Roth, because there had been you guys were around and like obsessed Van Halen fan, or even like a fan, or like a casual fan. There were numerous rumors like, oh, they're going to get back with Roth. They're going to, this has been like the time of the MTV reunion. And then there'd be other times. It was just always like kind of like the 2004, right before the Sammy reunion in 2004, there was talk that Roth was going to go back. And there was always this sort of like, oh, it's going to happen. It never happened. You're like, okay, it's never going to happen. And then suddenly that was like, oh, it's actually happening. I can't believe it's happening.
For me, once they did that, what was it, like 96 or 97 when they did the greatest hits CD, and then they went on, and then they went on the MTV Awards, and okay, here we go. And then when that didn't happen, I said I don't think it would ever happen.
No, I didn't think so either. So I was always, I was always of the opinion that I was always of the I was always of the opinion too that this thing could blow up at any time. Like I was actually. I thought like, not that I wasn't going to go, but I said, anybody who's like vacillating about, you're a fan and vacillating about going in 2007, you're a fool, because odds are they're going to kick him out of the band.
Exactly.
I mean, I was like thinking, the fact that it lasted all the way to the end is kind of amazing. And, that's a whole nother podcast discussion, but like that they, like, cause I always assumed that it was just a matter of time, but they were like, F Dave, we're getting Sammy back, right? We're going to get Sammy back.
Now I remember why we hated this 15 years ago, right?
Right.
Or whatever.
So, and then it just, then it continued. So I was just sort of like, take it for what it is. And then, we'll see what ends up happening. But yeah, and then when it kept going, I kept thinking like, oh, maybe they'll do the thing with Mike. And just, never happened.
I said it earlier, just so you know that I mean it, Ed. The high points of my life have been spent on stage working with you. You too.
So I guess for after show fun, you weren't pounding beers in the car with your mom, but did you go home and listen to your headphones or anything like that?
I don't even remember. I mean, I think it was a school night.
Oh, right.
I mean, it was a school night. It was a Monday night. So I think I just kind of like, drove back in the car. My mom probably peppered me with questions and my ears were ringing. And
So what was that day like the next day when you went to school?
You wore your shirt and everything, and you're like, whoa, yeah. It was, I was kind of a shy kid, but there was obviously a lot of buzz. One funny kind of story that doesn't relate to the 84 tour, but to the Eat 'Em and Smile tour, was that there was a girl I went to high school with who was in my class who sort of like became like this metal queen. Like she was a very good looking girl, and she sort of like had like the hair, like the sort of like poison hair to big, and like she would wear like spandex to school. Like it was a whole thing. Like she was like, like the hot metal girl. And so I remember very vividly, like, and I asked her about it, and she said yes. And I'm sure it was true that she got to go backstage in '86 and like met Dave or whatever. Like, and again, I'm sure there were like dozens of girls who had this, like, were given passes to go back, which, that was like the ultimate, like, that was the ultimate next day concert story. Like you met David Lee Roth, and whatever. She was 16, right? She was 17. She was 16 or at most, I think, maybe 17. Probably 17th most. I'm guessing she was 16. So whatever it is, I'm sure it was perfectly. Everything was on the up and up, and I don't think anything weird happened. But I don't want to throw shade at her. But like the fact that she could say that she went backstage at a David Lee Roth concert, like that was the ultimate like lunch table like cred. You were like, and I didn't know her super well, but I was just, she was like, it's just like I did actually meet Dave, brother. So
nice.
People keep reminding me of this kind of crazy image. People keep invoking this wild-eyed, slack-jawed image and everything. And I tell you, I've been seeing the same girl now for maybe 2, maybe 3 weeks, man.
Well, before we get you out of here, would you go see a reformed Van Halen in any way? With obviously Wolfie stepping in for his dad. I think do Alex, Mike, and Sammy, and then Wolfie stepping in, which I don't think they would ever do. I don't think Wolfie should do that. But let's say they did. Would you go see that?
Okay, so like in an alternate universe, Wolfgang wakes up one day and says, I want to put Van Halen back together, which he said like over and over again, he won't. Okay, so we're all putting that out there as sort of a preface to this. So it's
and I'll put it out there. Like, I don't want him to. I don't think they should.
Yeah, right. I agree. Like struck by lightning. But sure, if like Wolfgang and Alex announced on some like, alternate universe, they were like, we're going to go out as Van Halen and do something, I'm sure I would go. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a whole nother conversation about that. And I think at the end of the day, for me, it's sort of like the fact that they haven't, meaning the royal they, meaning Eddie and that Alex and Wolfgang have decided to sort of like basically retire it. It's smart. I mean, look, I'm not throwing shit at any other band for doing what, for continuing it on. But I always think it's like you can't argue against it when Wolfie says, my dad was basically the essence of Van Halen, like musically. You can't have a Van Halen without Eddie Van Halen. I mean, it's like, it'd be like having an Elvis show without Elvis, right? It's like, we're going to put the Elvis, the Taking Care of Business band back together or whatever, but we're not going to have Elvis, and it's like, okay. It's like, and so I think honestly, like, whatever arrangement of people you could imagine. I mean, I think it's just there. I think Alex is. Look, I have no inside information, but I think by all Alex is done. I just think he's like retired, retired, right? And again, like I think that's actually very respectable and admirable to say, like, done my thing. I don't really want to go out and jam with people. I'm not going to be the guy who shows up. Like, obviously, any band in the universe, like you could show up and say, I want to play drums tonight, and
he didn't stay too long, right? He didn't stay to the point where he sucks. Yeah.
Right. Or even if he was, even if you're like, yeah, I'm sure he can still play great. I mean, like he could show up like he could show up on the Motley Crue Def Leppard show and say, I want to play drums, Tommy. And I'm sure Tommy Lee would be like,
he would jump. Yeah, he would jump out of his seat. Yeah.
Dude,
Yeah.
like any band on the planet would let him. Again, I'm just making that up as like
obviously he can come for a couple songs, right?
Yeah. Again, like it's not in the car. He doesn't want to do it. I mean, I think, barring any like amazing change of heart, I think by everything we can see, like he's not into that. He just never played with anyone but his brother. He doesn't want to do that. And, so it's good. I mean, I think it's good insofar like Zeppelin, like they ended it. I think that's the other thing too to think about. It's like, I have no idea what Alex is thinking about this. None. No idea. But I would say that he is a massive Led Zeppelin fan. And when Bonham died, they put it to bed. Again, they did they did the couple of reunion things they did with Jason and stuff like that. It was a little different, maybe that it was the Live Aid thing. And it was like this, obviously there's like, they did it at that point in the 80s. They did
for Atlantic Records in 88.
In the charity.
They did in Networth 1990. Yeah.
Right. It's like once a decade they do it. And like, again, maybe, who knows? I mean, like maybe 5-6 years ago from now, maybe there's like some charity thing and Alex and Wolfie want to go up there and play a couple of Van Halen songs together and, whatever. Like that would be amazing. But I think the basic essence was it was like when Led Zeppelin ended, it ended, right? They didn't sort of like keep trying to trot out like a guy to replace Bonham. They were like, we'll get,
Now, having said that, I have seen Wolfie. I mean, I saw him play, and I'm sure you did too.
Mm-hmm.
He played Panama at the Taylor Hawkins tribute deal. So
yeah,
it's not that he can't play it. He is absolutely 100% capable of stepping up to do it. So, but yeah, kudos to him for not trying to not distance himself, but he's like, I've got my own thing. I'm doing my own thing.
Yeah.
Let's let Van Halen, like you said, like Led Zeppelin, just let it be what it was and not try and beat it to death.
Yeah, I think it's to have it be your dad and to be like, I'm going to try to step in for him would feel, I don't know, maybe not for everybody, but I think I could understand why that would feel wrong.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Especially when like your dad would not be like, from everything I've heard Wolfie say, like I believe he said in so many words, like my dad would be pissed off if he was like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah,
playing my music, play your own music.
Go make your own stuff. Yeah.
Well, he said,
I think
I don't know where it was. It might've been on Stern where he was like, he would have said, Ed would have said, don't mess around with my old shit. Go play your new shit.
Right. And the fact that his father heard all the music and, there's some very poignant stories about his father being, in the last years of his life and sort of being around 5150 and coming up and listening to the music. Obviously he was around for the birth of all I think most of the two albums, when I understand that I remember Wolfie said that he had a lot of the songs that ended up in the first two records were done before his father passed, or at least demoed. The fact that his father was so enthusiastic about the music. I mean, yeah, and again, you just become a nostalgia act, right? You can't.
Yeah.
What are you going to write new Van Halen music? Well, no one's going to. I don't mean to say that's an offensive way to Wolfie, but like if Wolfie wrote a new Van Halen song, it's not going to replace Unchained, right? You know what I mean? Like that's not even like with his own music, you'd be like excited. It's Mammoth, and I love listening to the music, and you go to see them live, and they're amazing live, and you're like, it's cool, but like sort of be like, here's Van Halen, and we're going to like put out songs as Van Halen. It just would feel like, it would just feel like you're trying to recreate something that, or even, again, it's not even about, I think cashing in is interesting too, but I think it's like, it's not even about the money, right? Because I doubt that would be forefront in his mind, but it's just a matter of like trying to like, what are you trying to, you're trying to basically chase something that can't be recreated. That's the reality.
See, even Eddie, I think, fell into that. Even he didn't try. I mean, from 1995 to the day he died,
right.
He wasn't exactly prolific, man. I mean, you know, they made the Gary Cherone album, Van Halen 3.
Right.
They had a few new songs on the 2 greatest hits, and then they had A Different Kind of Truth, which is where they reworked some songs that have been lying around for decades, right?
Right.
So he didn't do a whole lot, and so even he didn't want to compete with his past. But that's probably my biggest beef with them, to be honest.
Well, that's always that's the kind of the blessing and the curse is that you have a catalog like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people really want to hear those songs, and then when you reach a different stage in your life, 25, 30 years after your peak fame, your peak songwriting successes, the implication is it's very difficult for a mid-career artist to sort of surpass again that level of success. There are probably examples we can figure out if we talked about artists who were sort of like hit their stride a little bit later, like their 7th or 8th album, and they became more successful. But it's like whatever Jimmy Page did. I mean, I had the Outrider album, I had the Firm album. It's like nothing compared to Led Zeppelin. I'm sorry, it just did. Yeah. It wasn't even close. Right?
He knows it too.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's and to Ed's credit, like the stuff he did on Balance is great, and there's stuff that they did on the Different Kind of Truth album that I think a lot of the Different Kind of Truth album really will hold up. But again, it's like they were aware that I think those guys were aware that trying to sort of go like, oh, we're going to put out an album, especially in the economics of the music industry today, it just didn't make sense to them. So Look, I think the good news is that we did get that one. I think it would have been very disappointing if we had not gotten a record with Roth and Van Halen post reunion. I think that would have been a huge disappointment. And kudos to Wolfie for really pushing that over the finish line. From what I understand, that was a very difficult process, and there was a lot of just
no doubt.
I mean, just whatever. It was just a whole bunch of stuff that took in. He was really instrumental in kind of keeping them focused on getting that done, and so. Yeah, it's and of course, what's very strange is that it's not on iTunes and not on Spotify for some reason because of the licensing from Interscope, I guess. But that album has some very enjoyable moments on it, and it was really great to hear Ed and Wolf and just to have like a Van Halen album again. Mm-hmm. They were one and done with that, and then they did the live album, which to me was just whatever it is. But that was just in terms of the studio album, they were one and done with the reunion.
Well, Greg, this has been a lot of fun. Can you tell our listeners like where to find you on social media,
Sure.
How to get your books?
Sure. Yeah, I'm pretty active on Twitter. It's at GREGRENOFF, my first name, my last name. On Twitter, my books are available, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all those types of good places. I sell autographed copies if you want me to sign your book through, there's a link in my Twitter at templemanbook.com, and you can go and you can order a signed copy from me. But for the most part, yeah, I'm just really appreciative that people still care to, read my books or are interested in talking about this stuff. And so, yeah. Appreciate it. That's really Twitter's really the best way to get a hold of me.
I was just going to say, you were talking about the reunion with Roth, and Wolfie was saying apparently that he was going through putting a set list together in his head, and he's writing it all out. And there was a Sammy song. And Dave was,
oh, that's a funny story.
Yeah, what is this? What? Nothing. What?
That's a classic. So I've forgotten that story. That's a great story. Yeah, he talked about that. I think again, I don't remember what it was. It was like what's the matter? It was like pound cake or something.
It's something like that. Yeah, which wasn't one of his, and it was like, oh no, what that? No. Don't worry about that. Oops.
Yeah. I think that was probably like a very awkward moment. I'm sure that was a very awkward 5 to 10 seconds in Wolfie's life where he was like, when he sort of realized what he did, he was like, when Ross was like, I don't know that song. What album is that on? And he was like, oh, sorry. Let's continue. Yeah, I mean, all credit to Wolfie for putting that thing together. I mean, I think it's pretty much the historical record shows that if he had not pushed for that never would have happened. That reunion with Roth never would have happened. At least not in 2007, 2008, maybe but where things were going, it was not looking like it was ever going to happen.
It really is heartbreaking the fact that Ed passed, but then you learn the whole story of, Sammy coming out and saying, yeah, we had been talking, we did get back together, and he was on the cusp of reaching out to Michael Anthony. It's like, oh. Right.
Yeah, I think that's really, after Ed passed, it's sort of clear that he was sicker than people knew, or at least had, the cancer, he had periods of remission, but he never really had long stretches where there was no you didn't have to deal with something with the cancers. And so it's really,
Right.
it was a shocking, definitely a very, very shocking day. You know, everyone knew, I shouldn't say everybody, but I think it was pretty clear at that point because he had been sort of absent from, like, you would see pictures of him, and there was always pictures that would be posted of Ed were always like from official channels that were always like, you're like, oh, that's from 3 years ago, like, or whatever, like the haircut, like whatever, you can first see like it was like that was taken at a certain time and you sort of recognized it, and then they sort of like gave you, you know, people would pay attention to that, you were sort of like, oh, it doesn't give me a good vibe about what's going on. And then of course he announced that he passed away, so another.
That's for sure. Changed the world, changed our lives almost 3 years ago, because that was our first ever episode, was the tribute to Eddie Van Halen, and what we're like 150 in now at this point.
A good reason to launch a podcast. I mean, yeah, it was, you know, he was somebody who changed the game in so many ways, and it's, you know, I thought that there would be I'll share I can't do it, but documentary idea. Like, you know, it would be somebody just to hear, like you hear so many musicians talk about their meeting Eddie Van Halen, like, you know, Nuno Bettencourt and all, like, there's all these Dweezil Zapple, all these guys talking about, and men and women who talk about like when they met Eddie, like the meeting with Eddie, and like just again, like encountering him and what an inspiration that was for them. Like just sort of like to have him out there in the world making music, and then have that moment like, oh, we jammed, or he gave me a guitar or something like that. Like that is like, for those people, when you hear them talk about it, it was like really soul fuel for them. It really made them more impassioned about music and stuff like that. So it's just a loss that we can't even calculate. So yeah.
That's right. Well, Greg, your knowledge and passion of Van Halen is amazing, and we really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us here today.
Remind me to be out. Well, yeah, appreciate it. Remind me next time we talk. I'll try to stick more to the questions, but I appreciated it very much. It was fun.
The questions don't matter. You know, what matters is you saw Van Halen as a 14-year-old.
I did.
And it turned you on, and it changed your life, and that's awesome.
I did. Here I am.
Yeah, exactly.
Look how, as my mom said, look how well you turned out. Like, you know, whatever bad parenting thing she did, she's always like, and look how well you turned out. Like, exactly, Mom.
Don't take drugs.
You did that one right for sure.
Definitely, man. Definitely. No, thanks a lot, man. And good luck with the book,
it.
You know, and
thank you.
Keep rock alive, man. Do your part.
You too.
You're awesome.
You guys appreciate it. Thanks.
Right. Thanks, man. Take care.
We got discovered. The president of Warner Brothers came down and saw us playing in a bar one night. We were playing for free, and he came with our producer, Ted Templeman, who else does he produce?
Oh, a variety of artists.
Doobie Brothers, Little Feat.
Right.
You think it's hard to get a word in edgewise with me talking, Jackson?
Well, and you know, he makes his living doing this, you know, writing, but I mean, this is his band too. So
that's right.
And just looking at this set list, like you couldn't be, especially if that was your first show, you couldn't be like, well, I wish they really would have played something off Van Halen too. No, you walked out of there, your head exploding. And I think he downplayed that a little bit. There's no way you didn't go to high school the next day. They'll walk in and they're like the king of the castle.
Exactly.
Come on now, with the shirt on, like, yeah, you know where I was last night, suckers.
I know, and we gotta say the set list, you know, for everybody. It was April 2nd in East Rutherford. Start with Unchained. Oh my God! Can you imagine? You come out to that, my God. Then straight into Hot for Teacher. Well, that's kind of even taking it up a notch as far as speed goes. Then Alex does his drum solo. On Fire, Running with the Devil, Little Guitars and Cathedral. So it's almost like Eddie has a couple of solos almost.
Yeah.
Because then they do House of Pain, Mikey's bass solo, Jamie's Crying, I'll Wait, Everybody Wants Some. By the way, didn't he marry a girl named Jamie after he divorced Valerie?
I believe he did, yes.
So that's kind of bizarre. I mean, it'd be like Greg Allman marrying some girl named Melissa, you know, or whatever. But anyway, Everybody Wants Some. Girl Gone Bad, which is a heavy song. 1984, the keyboards, they can go right into the next song, Jump, nice. Then they did guitar solo. You mentioned there was Eruption, a little bit of Mean Street in there. And then, Oh, Pretty Woman, Panama, You Really Got Me, and Ain't Talking About Love. You go, oh my God, Jump, Eddie's guitar solo, Pretty Woman, Panama, You Really Got Me, Ain't Talking About Love. My head would have exploded.
Yeah. And in looking through this set list, they only did not play two songs off 1984, Top Jimmy and Drop Dead Legs, which I like both of those songs. But I mean, they damn near played the entire album. So even if you were a huge 1984 fan, this was great. It wasn't one of those where they played two and then they went into the back catalog.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Whereas, like when we saw them in the Sammy era, although we ended up on the live album, I'm pretty sure they didn't play Ain't Talking About Love for us.
No.
They did You Really Got Me. That's cool and all. But I don't think Sammy, I mean, they did Jump, they did Panama. You kind of had to. I don't think Sammy liked doing Jump. I think it took him a while before he did Jump. So that was kind of a thing there. But look, it's very different from what we saw. And gosh, it just makes you wish you were just that little bit older.
And now it makes me want to go and watch that documentary. I think it's on Netflix about the kid who won that Lost Weekend deal.
Oh, really? Yeah, and I got to see that.
Yeah, because apparently he was saying he won it from MTV, but there was zero supervision. Like he got dropped off and they just said, good luck. And all of a sudden he's backstage doing all kinds of things with the band. And yeah, he's like, I could have just been dead and no one even would have noticed.
So cool of Greg Renoff to join us to talk Van Halen on the second episode of First Concert Memories. And gosh, the first one we had with Tom and Zeus was great, but they're our age, and we saw what Zeus's first one. We could have maybe seen Tom's first one. Ours was in between the two, but we were not quite old enough to see 1984. Gosh, what an amazing night it would have been to see them on that tour. And obviously it changed Greg's life. I mean, he's literally grown up to write a couple of books now about Van Halen and Ted Templeman. And you can purchase those Amazon, wherever you get your books, but definitely go to his Twitter account at Greg Renoff if you want an autographed copy. Super guy, and we really appreciate his insights. It was a fun conversation. And while it's only our second episode of First Concert Memories, it is the fifth Van Halen episode we've ever done on Ugly American Werewolf in the Universe. Our very first was a tribute to Eddie, but we've also done album reviews of the first album, Diver Down, and OU812, so you might want to go back out and check those out. Had a lot of fun doing those. And all you Van Halen collectors should head over to our sponsor, rarevinyl.com. Use code UGLY and save 10% off anything you buy there. It's a one-time code, so don't just buy one $5 Van Halen album. Go find a rare Japanese import. Go find a picture disc. Go find a bunch of stuff and save yourself a big 10% using the code UGLY at rarevinyl.com. This is a monthly show, so if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one, go ahead and subscribe to the Ugly American Werewolf in London wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to download those. And if you're thinking about it, folks, hey, give us a positive review. It just helps us find more rock fans like you and helps us grow the show. Thank you, as always, to Pantheon Pods. Check out Pantheon Pods at Pantheon Pods on socials, pantheonpodcast.com on the web. And keep going to live music, folks. It's the only thing that's going to keep rock alive.